Welcome to Teaching That Counts, a podcast dedicated to the teaching and learning of mathematics. I'm your host, Abel Maestas, and I love to talk about math education. Together with my amazing guests, we'll explore several topics in the world of math teaching and student learning. Whether it's building thinking classrooms, healing math trauma, building student and teacher math confidence, or creating more equitable math workspaces. If it's going to help students learn math and teachers teach math, then we'll talk about it. So if you're a teacher, a parent like me, admin, or a coach like me, I hope you find something that can inspire you and help build your practice listening to this podcast. You can always find us online at www.teachingthatcountspodcast.com. Yeah, I know that's long, but hey, that's the URL. You can find me on YouTube at Maestas Math or on socials at Maestas Teach. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Okay, well, welcome to the podcast, everybody. This month, I know it's a little later than I normally post the podcast, but I'm switching the dates a little bit. Many of you out there that listen, you know that I'm also co-hosting the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders, and that one comes out on the 15th every month. So I didn't want to conflict with that podcast coming out. So really, what I'm going to try doing for Teaching That Counts is bring out our podcast every month at the end of the month. So this one should be coming out here at the end of January. So on to this episode. Man, I am so thrilled for all of you to listen to this one. It's a long episode, so I'm gonna make the intro here pretty short. But finally, I have been able to connect with the one and only Jo Boaler. So it's so great to have Jo on the podcast. For those of you new or wondering who she is, Jo Boaler is the co-founder of ucube.org. She's written so many books. She's written Mathematical Mindsets. If you haven't, you should read that. And her newest book, Mathish, is wonderful. We get some time here to talk about Mathish. And a lot of the conversation today revolves around the new book, the things that she brings to the inspiration for the new book, things that people can think about in terms of how do we get our kids to think in an ish way, right? A lot of the real world doesn't work in exact numbers. We think in estimates. And how can we think ish, especially with things like fractions and especially fraction division? We have a wonderful conversation about that and the importance of people thinking in an ish way when dealing with fractions. We also talk a little bit about data science. Data science is so critical now in our education system. Now it's going to be so critical for the lives of our kids as they enter the workforce. And we know, I'm not sure there's too many jobs that don't deal with data. And really, if it's not in your job, in real life, we're inundated with some sort of data. So it's we have a conversation about how important that is and some resources for teachers out there to find some cool things they could do with their kids in integrating data science. And we do it, like I said, we have a long we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So much stuff we really couldn't fit it in one episode. One last thing that we do talk about, we touch on the California Math Framework. And I'm here in California. Jo was one of many people that participated in the creation of that framework, and I am just so thrilled and excited for this framework and the exciting ways that we're going to be looking at teaching our kids and giving access to mathematics to all of the students, to a lot of the students that haven't had that access, right? Well, that's why it's so critical that we think about how we're teaching and that did the system really work for everyone? I mean, if it was working for everyone, we'd see everyone being good at mathematics, and we just don't see that. So we talk about the inspiration for the framework, some of the impacts that it can have on students, and then we do touch a little bit on the controversies behind the framework and how it's being attacked by certain people that frankly don't wouldn't like to see a change in mathematics education. So we talk a little bit about that. I'm very supportive of Jo and her work. I'm very supportive of the California framework, and we talk about why it's so critical that we start thinking about how we can bring all students into learning maths, as Jo would say. And so I'm so excited again to share this with you. Please enjoy this conversation with Jo Boaler. All right, well, welcome to this episode of Teaching That Counts. And I'm so excited. We finally got this together. I know we've been working on this for a few months anyway. And I'm so excited to be joined by Jo Boaler, writer of so many works and so much research. And we're going to talk about your new book. Thank you for joining me, Jo.
Thank you for inviting me here. I'm looking forward to chatting.
All right, awesome. So I know over the last couple weeks we've had break. Most teachers have had break,
Hmm.
and I saw on Facebook that some teachers are reading Mathish,
Oh,
the
great.
newest book that you've come out with, which has been really cool. And I loved Mathish, and one of the things I loved about the book was that it was I don't know if you meant it to be this way, but it was a little different style
Hmm.
than the mindset mathematics books. There were there were drawn. I love the illustrations.
Oh,
They
yeah.
were really cute, and there was a
Good.
there was one. Oh man, I loved it. There was this little illustration, and I think it was one where you had there were these like little guys, and they were all mad about like doing math the traditional way, and
Yes.
I thought that was just so funny because
It
I
was,
know
I
that
think you're talking about the image that was depicting the ghosts of the writers
yeah.
of, I forget now the name of it, but it was when they wrote up in the 1800s what math courses should be taught. And I point out that we haven't changed them since then. And there's a
Right.
little image of the writers going, no, 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 no change.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit because I know, like you and I both believe that math is okay. I wouldn't say math necessarily has changed, but our world has changed.
Our world has changed, yes.
And I was I think I was at NCTM in Chicago this year, and
Hmm.
actually I think we saw each other there,
Yeah.
and I think it might have been Robert Kaplinski who was saying, we have to change what we're doing. We're
Hmm.
teaching we're teaching mathematics in 2025 now as if it was 1975.
Wow.
And a lot of your research, a lot of the stuff that you've worked on over the past many years has been about thinking about this and how are we going to change teaching of mathematics, the
Hmm.
pedagogy, to meet the needs of our kids' futures, and we don't even know what they're going to be doing in 30 years, to be
Right.
honest.
That's right. And certainly we know that they're going to have to be problem solving and figuring things out and reasoning and engaging in critical thinking. And those are so important, that giving kids the opportunity to learn to problem solve and engage with critical thinking is so important. But it's not what we tend to have done. Many maths classrooms, as you know, are still like showing kids methods and they reproduce them. Um, so, yeah, we could definitely think about what is the world looking like. And the other thing that motivates me to try and get ideas out there is we have so much research about what works in mathematics. Some incredible new research from neuroscience showing the way our brains work. And some that I share in the book is all the evidence that's coming out about visualizing in maths. It's so important to think visually, and students who can look at a cluster of dots and group them in different ways, that and see how those dots could be, I don't know, 6, 6, and 2, or 4, 4, and 10. But kids who learn to do that, which is called rupetizing, end up doing better in standardized tests for all the years into school. They're seeing maths visually, and they're able to think about how to group numbers visually. They don't think numbers are just abstract symbols. Um, and I mean, that's just one example of the research we have on just having kids visualize or use their fingers. The evidence of kids, the need for them to use their fingers is very strong. That evidence doesn't get out to schools and it doesn't change what happens in classrooms. So that's why we made UCubed, which was to get ideas out that's often locked up in research journals. Um, so yeah, thinking about how the world has changed and also just thinking about, can we pay attention to what we know about research and learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the site ucubed. I went to ucubed for some non-curricular tasks when I are doing that for my classes. And one of the things I learned on ucubed was your data science course.
Mm.
And I used to teach statistics for many years. And here's a little quick funny story. When I was about 6 year, 7 year teacher, and my department head came to me and said, "Hey, I need you to teach statistics." And I was like, "I told you when I got hired, I'll teach anything but statistics. Like I don't want to teach statistics." And because I was having memories of the experience that I had in college of college
Mm.
statistics, and she guilted me into teaching it. Right? Like, okay, well, if you don't teach it, no one's gonna, the kids won't have anybody. So I taught it, and um, my first year I struggled, but I tell you, every year after, I started to become a believer of statistics and the importance that it means for people, not just my students, but the understanding of data and why that is so important in the world that we live in right now. And this was years ago. So um, I was super excited about that data science course, and we brought it to our school. Um,
Lovely.
but can you talk a little bit about like the importance of data science and why it's
Yeah.
so important for our kids?
I mean, this is a change that's come about probably in the last 5 to 10 years, that we now live in this world that's filled with data. And data is driving a lot of what's happening in industry, in medicine, in sports, in many, many parts of the world. And students, children are being shown data visualizations and results from data all the time. And if we're not helping them make sense of data and make sense of data visualizations, I really think we're leaving them vulnerable to misinformation in the world. The COVID
Yeah.
pandemic was a great example of people not understanding exponential growth and the graphs that were shown. If they had, it would have saved lives, a lot of lives. But there are many examples, not just in medicine. We need our students to be able to make sense of data. And what I love is when we do data investigations in classrooms, kids are so excited. They love doing that work. And we've been sharing on our website data investigations across the grades. The latest one we put out just before the break, actually, is a whole basketball unit where
Oh wow.
kids we wanted kids to do a data investigation where they chose their favorite players from this database of basketball players. And we realized there's a lot of data that maybe kids don't understand if they don't play basketball, they don't watch it. So we built this unit to teach the kids basketball. And we did it with the Stanford women's basketball team.
Oh
And
wow.
some of the
Cool.
players made videos for the kids showing them the different shots and what they meant. And the kids build basketball courts to help them like actually play it a little bit in the classroom. They build them on their table, and it ends up with them doing this data investigation. But I love this data, and there's so much mathematics inside it. They're learning maths all the way through this data project, but um, they love it. Students are no longer saying, when am I going to use this? They see how relevant it is to their lives. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about data. I wish it had a bigger place in the standards. I was one of
Yeah.
the writers of the California Maths framework that was passed last year. And one of the things we did in that process was really kind of highlight where data is in the standards, uplight it, and help teachers know that they can teach these ideas through these really engaging data investigations.
Yeah, and that brings up the idea of data talks, and I know that
Mm-hmm.
you've done number talks, which as a high school teacher I was like, number talks, and then I saw it done, and I was like, wow, this is really really cool. So I love number talks, and now I've been super interested in data talks. It's
Mm-hmm.
something, being a statistics teacher and believing so much that I think students really needed statistics to, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, to identify misinformation.
Yeah.
And I I was pushing teachers. I'm a coach now. I'm pushing teachers to
Mm-hmm.
use statistics and to do data talks. And so it's one of my new things I'm really trying to
Love
push.
data talks. Yeah.
I love data talks, and I did one with a building thinking classroom style in a PD
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, where we did a slow reveal graph,
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
and the teachers loved it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
so
great.
do you you have data talks
Yeah.
on U
So
cubed?
UCubed has a whole set of data talks. The idea of a data talk is you show a data visualization and ask the students, what do you notice? What do you wonder? There's no right or wrong answers. You're really just inviting them to unpack what's in the data visual. And some of them, well, all of them really are so super engaging. So there's a great data talk which shows Steph Curry's shots on the basketball, and it's actually on a basketball court. The data is shown, could have been on a graph, but it's actually shown on a basketball court where you see where he moves around. And that one's super popular. We have one that shows popular dogs. We have one that we have a few that highlight issues in the environment, because when you're looking at data, that's a really great way. There's one on polar bear extinction. Kids are super interested, and teachers really just need to show the data visual and ask, what do you notice? And have kids learn to read a data visual. Very helpful in protecting them in this world they live in, where they'll get data visuals that they need to make sense of. But and teachers don't need to be an expert in the content of the data visual. Like, you can show a basketball, you could show our Steph Curry data talk and know nothing about basketball because, well, first of all, the kids will, and they
Hmm.
can
Yeah.
give you lots of information. But also, even if questions come up and nobody knows the answer, it's a great opportunity to model for kids. You don't always have all the answers, and you're okay with that. You can find out, we can learn, we can go and investigate things and look up on the internet. So, love data talks. Would encourage all teachers to use them. We have them on our website that go across all grades, starting with kindergarten and going upwards.
Going up all the way up to 12th grade. I know that
Yes.
I love that Steph Curry one.
Yeah.
I'm a big basketball fan, and I used to coach basketball. And the funny thing is,
Oh,
I used to bring my statistics into coaching basketball,
yeah.
thinking about
You
where
must
shots
check out
were.
our new unit.
Oh, I would love to. Is it a new unit in data science, or is
So
it
it's
just a?
on, it's in lots of places on our website, but it's under tasks. If you go to
Mm-hmm.
tasks, there's lots and lots of UCube tasks. And also, I think it's on our data page, but it's easy probably to find it on our task page. It's the first one there at the moment.
Hmm. Great. Yeah, and there's a actually a website, I can't remember off the top of my head, where that graphic came from for Steph Curry, that
Mm.
you can get updated graphics for multiple players in the NBA. And I was at CMC South,
Hmm.
and the presenter showed us two things and did a data talk with some newer data, and I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
this is love it. And so I showed it to our data science teacher, and he's like, I love this, I'm going to use it tomorrow.
There are some amazing websites now, actually, that share beautiful data visuals. I love a site called Knowledge is Beautiful.
Oh,
David McCandless is the person who puts all that together. Lots of data visuals that are all really creative and show lots of important things in the world. Statistica has hundreds of thousands of great data visuals. And I mean, we have data talks on our website, but really you can take any data visual and just show it to kids and ask them what they see.
yeah. Great. I love data talks. And I'm going to continue to spread how important I think data talks are for, gosh, do it twice a week if possible
Yes.
with some groupatizing every other day. Um, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I was speaking to the coaches in my district and we were talking about a part in Mathish where you talk about fractions. And there's a big piece of work that they're doing with their elementary school teachers on fractions. And so they said, hey, if you can
Great.
ask her something about fractions. I said, okay. So
Yeah.
as I was reading, the other coach and I got into this discussion. I was like, take a look at this. This is division of fractions. And we were talking about how understanding the concept of division of fractions is difficult. And you mentioned in the book that it's really actually misplaced in terms of where kids are learning it, and because of the concept being a little more abstract. But the way that it was approached using common denominators and visualization, we were talking and we just had an aha moment. And the other coach was, "You just changed my life. I can't believe I haven't been doing that." And so I
Great.
just wanted to, before you get going, I just want to tell you about this little anecdote too. So my daughter's in fifth grade. She's doing a lot of fraction work, and so we're going to school before the break, and she's just wrapping up her addition and subtraction. And
Mm.
so we talk about multiplication. And so I said, what do you think 1/2 multiplied by 1/3 is? And so we talked about groups and she's visualizing it. And then then she understands why we need a common denominator. And then I said, well, what about if you divide? And automatically she started to think about what that meant. And she was able to formulate an idea of division of fractions. And I was like, this is the most fun conversation with my 10-year-old that I've had in a long time.
That's great.
So,
That shows you're a math nerd.
yeah, total math nerd. I mean, I've got a vertical non-permanent surface in my living room that we write on. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah. So my question here is, really, the elementary teachers are the ones that are teaching division of fractions.
Hmm.
So how can they rethink teaching
Yeah.
fractions,
Yeah.
especially division,
Yeah.
when it's a little bit misplaced in how
Well, I'll
bringing
tell
these
you
forward?
something that I think applies to all the fraction manipulation, whether it's addition, subtraction, multiplication, is the big problem that kids have with fractions is they don't think about the two numbers as a relationship. Like the two numbers in a fraction really don't mean anything on their own. It really matters what they mean in relation to each other, that this number, this fraction, shows you a relationship between these two numbers. And when kids learn to do things with the denominator or the numerator, add these, subtract this, multiply this, they lose sight of that relationship. They think, oh, I have to do this to the numerator, I have to do this to the denominator. They lose that they have this like whole fraction. And one of the examples I share in the book actually that really shows this very clearly is students in a test that was given across the country were asked what the approximate answer was to 12/13 plus 7/8. So both of those fractions, 12/13 and 7/8, are close to 1. And they were given a choice of options. Is it 1, 2, 19 or 21?
Hmm.
And most people in the US chose 19,
What?
followed by 21.
Oh
Those were
my
the top two
goodness!
answers.
Wow.
So we can like shake our heads and
I
go,
know.
what?
I know.
What? This is terrible. 12/13 plus 7/8. And most people say it's 19 or 21. So, but you know what they're doing. They're adding the numerators, they're adding denominators, they're not thinking they're not thinking in an ish way. That's what I
Right.
talk about in the book. If you were to think this is one ish and one ish. So I think that, for starters, is a problem. We always need kids. And I suggest in the book, if they're adding fractions, if they're subtracting, if they're multiplying, start with asking them, well, like, what would the ish answer be? Forget the manipulation, forget the calculation. What would the ish answer be? That will keep them thinking conceptually. But then, yeah, getting to division of fractions, the whole flip and multiply is totally confusing for kids.
Hmm.
They do not understand why that works. It's like a magic formula. Um, and what we can do with division of fractions is think about them visually. And how would you visually think about, for example, half divided by a third? What visual would you have for that? What would you draw? How would you think about it? And then the other thing that I talk about in the book is, if you're dividing fractions, always make them the same denominator first. That's
Hmm.
another piece of information. If you keep making equivalent fractions until you get them to the same denominator, however long that takes, then you have two numbers that you're dividing that make more sense. So yeah, I think division fractions is a terrible topic for a lot of kids, and they're really traumatized by it. And anyway, whoever divides fractions in the world,
Oh,
that's
that's
another
true.
conversation we could have. But it
Yeah.
really makes kids afraid of math. So finding different ways that make sense to them is super important.
And that was such a powerful thing that got me thinking about, like, who does that? Who
Who does
divides
that?
fractions in the real world? I mean, maybe
Divides fractions by fractions.
by yeah, maybe Alexa if I ask her to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't even know in which context
It's
I would
hard to even
ask.
think of a context where you would divide a fraction by
Yeah,
a
yeah.
fraction.
Um,
Yet we
I mean,
put
we could
so much
make up a
emphasis on it.
context in a
Mm-hmm.
book, but that doesn't make it real. Which,
And of course, if people in the world did divide a fraction by a fraction, they would use technology. They wouldn't do it by hand anyway.
right,
So we spend all this time having kids jump through these hoops that can be quite damaging for them. Um, and they'll never use it again. And you were a high school teacher. High school is full of that.
right,
Methods and techniques that we know kids will never do again by hand.
factoring.
Yeah.
um, yeah,
How much
I
time do we spend on that in school? And somebody using factoring in the workplace, they're going to use technology.
right. I was talking to in my previous podcast. I had a guest. Her name was Rolanda Baldwin, and we were talking about something similar. And we said that the math isn't the answer. The math is the questions that we ask to lead us to the answer.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And
Yeah.
so it gets me thinking
I
on
don't know
what
if
we're
you've
doing.
seen, I think I put this in Mathish actually, Conrad Wolfram talking about
Hmm.
this four-stage process that they use in the world. He's a professional mathematician, and his company is one of the biggest, most important maths companies in the world. They power both Alexei and Siri. If you ask Siri a number question, it is Wolfram Alpha that's working
Well,
that out. But anyway, Conrad Wolfram talks about how there's this four-stage process always in the world of asking a question of something, then sort of setting up some sort of model that will help answer the question. Then you do a calculation, and then you have to interpret what comes out. And so there's this four-part process. And the part that they use technology for is the calculation part. And they have humans setting up the models, thinking about what they mean, interpreting them. But it's the calculation part that we spend all the time on in school. We don't do the other things with kids. We don't have them think about, what model would I set up to answer that question? how do I interpret what comes out? So I like his way of presenting that. I think he makes it very clear, and we should listen to him more.
Yeah. I remember using Wolfram Alpha back when I was in college, a long time
Yeah,
ago.
I know. I'm always showing it to my undergrads at Stanford. They don't know it often. Like, you're not using Wolfram Alpha?
Yeah. Um, can we talk about the framework? I
Yeah.
think that some of this conversation lends itself nicely to the drivers of investigation. And I really like how the new California framework puts an emphasis on why we learn math, how we learn
Mm-hmm.
math, and what we're learning.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you just talk about the the thought that went into putting those three, the drivers of investigation, the content connections, and the standards for math practice as the driving force for mathematics
Mm-hmm.
teaching
Mm-hmm.
in the state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that work, well, the California Maths Framework, despite how it's presented out in the press, came from a committee of 20 educators who were elected.
Right.
I was one of the people who wrote up their ideas, and there were four other writers as well. And so that committee and the writers, really, everybody thought we need kids to be learning maths for a purpose where they answering important questions. There's something really driving them, a mathematical purpose. And that was really behind the idea of drivers, the drivers of investigations. Like, why do you want to know this? That's one of the questions I have often when I go and watch lessons. I was watching a lesson recently, and the kids were all up at whiteboards, which are great to see them up there. But they were doing systems of equations. They just had two lines written on in front of them, solving this system of equation. And, one kid maybe in each group was doing the work and the others were standing off at the side talking about something else. But my question as I'm looking at it is, why should they care? Why do these kids care about what X and Y is in this equation? It's just an abstract equation given to them. And so the framework was saying, let's give kids, there are plenty of situations in the world where we might use systems of equations. Let's give them some real project that they work something out and there's a purpose to working it out. So, yeah, that was part of the thinking in the framework that why are we working on this maths problem? Are we trying to predict something? Are we trying to solve a problem in the world? Are we, what is the purpose of it?
Yeah, we were talking before we started the podcast. We were talking about how a lot of math educators are saying a lot of the same things in different
Mm-hmm.
ways, and I was speaking with Dr. Fisher, um, Fisher and Fry,
Mm-hmm.
um, visual learning,
Mm-hmm.
and they have those essential questions on why, what am I learning, why am I learning it, how do I know if I've learned it, what do I do if
Mm.
I don't know it, what do I do if I do know it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a lot of push, and I think that people in education know that we want the kids to know what they're learning, how do they know when they've learned it,
Mm-hmm.
and the next question is why am I doing it?
Right.
And so one person I know who's thinking about this is they're saying, okay, well, can I answer the question, am I going to use this in 20 years? And I think that's a great question. I think the framework helps with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there is no question, there's no content in mathematics that we can't put into a real situation where kids might need to use it. So why aren't we doing that? I mean, when we give them real situations, I mean, data science is a great example of this. Kids are asking their own questions and they're collecting data and they're making sense of data. It's so much more engaging for them. What is not engaging is just sitting going through abstract methods endlessly. So yeah, we took a lot of heat for the California Maths Framework, as you know,
Yeah.
and what this was one of the ideas people attacked, that you should make things relevant for kids, and people come in saying, there's no context to math. Maths is pure. You don't need any relevance. That's not what math is. That was the
Mm.
argument, and I find it hard, I don't really put it, that doesn't
Yeah.
convince me at
So,
all.
well, sometimes I often think that perspective is not quite there a lot. Like I was a math major, and I was gonna do at Cal Poly where I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. We had
Love Cal
a
Poly.
Yeah, it's awesome. We have several different ways you can go. You can go applied mathematics. You can go. Um, I'm not quite sure if it was called theoretical mathematics and
Mm-hmm.
a teaching route,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't go applied. But it's clear that when you get to that level of mathematics, you can do a lot of different things. But it's beautiful.
It is,
It's
yeah.
beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's a lot of problem solving. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Mm-hmm.
thinking. It's a lot of communicating.
And
And
sometimes beautiful maths can be like patterns.
yeah, right,
It's not really applied to anything outside of maths, but it's exploring mathematical patterns. Kids can be super interested in that because and they're really beautiful, and they really have to think about what they see in patterns. But
right.
again, there's a purpose to that. It's I think mathematically we can engage kids through bringing it into the world by giving them real problems. We can engage them through visualizing and seeing patterns. There's so many ways to engage kids mathematically,
Yeah,
and we need to do more of that.
we need to, and I think what I was trying to get to here was that I think sometimes that when we're looking at what is mathematics and the people that are talking that were I think against the framework are not seeing the kids that we teach every day. I've been teaching high school and junior high for what am I in my 26th year, 25th year now, and not every kid's going to be a math major. Not every kid. Some kids are going to be engineers, and they need to be able to apply some things. And most of the time, they're going to learn what they need to learn on the job rather than in the classroom. And some kids are struggling to make it through the day because their parents both work full time, or they have one parent, or they have no parents, and they're like, I don't think that the realization of what actually happens in schools every day is there to understand how we fight for kids and their
It's true.
mathematics ability and what they're going to be able to what they're going to need to use.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why I'm completely supportive of the California Math Framework. Um, and that's not just because of my thoughts in mathematics, but that's also has to do with the experience that I've had with kids and um, what I
I
believe
think
kids need.
a bit of part of the problem with all the pushback on the framework is it going out for public comments every few months. And I mean, I was involved in policy in England, and we would bring about new changes in curriculum and frameworks by having appointed committees of experts
Mm-hmm.
decide. And I could see, like for the framework, asking every county office across California to gather groups of teachers and give feedback. But members of the public who don't know anything about schools and education, that doesn't make sense to me. It's
Mm-hmm.
like if I wouldn't be expected to give comments on a new medical plan that was being brought out across the state. I would think I don't know enough about medicine to be able to give that comment.
Yeah.
But everybody's an expert in education, it seems,
Yeah.
in their mind,
In their mind, because they went to school, right?
because they went to school, yeah.
Uh, um, I was talking to a colleague, my colleague that I'm talking about. She works at the county office, and we were talking about this issue, and we often run into people and we ask, they are like, oh, why don't we just teach it like we were teaching it before, like I grew up? And then we ask, well, how was your experience in math? Oh, I didn't like it.
Yeah, horrible.
Yeah, horrible. So why would you want the same experience for your kid?
Isn't that interesting? And I have found that all the time in my career. People argue to keep maths the same, even though they had a horrible time with it themselves in school.
Yeah.
It's I remember interviewing some parents who had argued against NSF produced maths curriculum that were really great, and they'd campaigned against them. And I asked them, like, why are you campaigning against it? And one of the women said, it's not that I'm really traditional about anything else, but if you can change maths, you can change anything in the world, anything. And that idea was scary to her.
Mm.
Maths has to stay the same. Maths has to be sit kids down and recite methods and show them and test them on times tables, because if we can change that, then anything can change, which of course it can. But it was interesting to me. They really were not comfortable with the idea of doing anything different mathematically.
Yeah.
Again, though, the pushback came from outside of educators, as it did with the framework. I read so many news articles saying, oh, the framework is bad, or there's this opposition to the framework. And no news article said, well, let's look at who is opposed to the framework. Who is it? And almost entirely, it was very high achieving, very wealthy people who like the system the way it is.
When the system, the way the status quo works, if it benefits you, why change something that benefits you?
Exactly.
And I'm
why didn't
I'm
any
all
of the
about.
news people notice that? How did it come about that so many articles came out saying there's opposition to the framework, with not one of them pointing out who is opposed to it and who's not?
Yeah.
Why don't we, why didn't we ever think about that?
Should put that out there, huh? Definitely. Well, I just want to say I appreciate all of the work that you've done. I appreciate all of the work that we have from leaders in math education. Yourself,
Thank
Jo
you.
Boaler, Peter Lillidahl, friend of mine. I love his work. Robert
Yeah.
Kaplinsky, Dan Meyer. The list goes on
Yeah.
and on of all of
There's a lot of
the
great leaders in math.
great leaders in math education that are out there inspiring us to do the work for the kids, and think about how we can reimagine our mathematics teaching for the future. And I really appreciate all the work that all of you have done to help, and the little that I could do to get your voices out and heard
you do a
to
huge
as much.
amount.
I appreciate that.
We need people like you who not only are communicating and getting ideas out through things like this podcast, but are working with teachers and doing that really important work on the ground to get ideas into practice. We would be nowhere without that work.
Yeah, so shout out to
I
all the
appreciate
coaches
that.
out there, all the people that are working hard, and all the teachers that are working for their students. So, um,
Educators,
all the educators. Jo,
amazing people.
this has been a wonderful conversation. I honestly can talk to you for hours. So much to ask, but I only have a short period of time. So I'd love to have you on again if it works out in your schedule. I know you're super busy, and like I said, I appreciate you coming on.
But it's been really nice to chat with you, Abel, and I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you so much.
Highlighted my day.
Everyone out there, Jo Boaler, the new book, which is sort of new. It's been out for a little while here, math-ish. And if you haven't had a chance, make sure you read Mindset Mathematics. Changed my life when I read those. So you can also go to ucubed.org. Is that right?
Org, yeah.
Yeah, ucube.org for all those tasks, data talks, number talks, a bunch of other things.
Yeah,
The
lots of
data
things.
science course, all things. Oh, and one more thing, I don't want to forget to plug this. Struggly is an it's not an app. It's you have to have
Well, it's an online learning tool to learn maths visually and creatively. Yeah,
right.
you can't. You need something bigger than a phone because there's all these beautiful visuals. So using iPads are great. iPads, laptops. It's just struggly.com.
Struggly.com. Yes, excellent to get your kids working on productive struggle and doing all the
Yes, we
things we
called
talked
it
about.
struggly so that they would feel good about struggle. That's
Yeah,
a big part of it.
right. So much stuff that we haven't talked about. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and I appreciate all your work.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.